300 francs worth of books. And credit is a dirty word here in many respects. And so a lot of people don't have a credit card. A lot of people do have a credit card, and a lot of people have a credit card which they use to go shopping in America. Because, and my brother-in-law was the same, he didn't have a credit card until he left the country because he had no need for one here. But then he had to hire a car in the States, and you need a credit card. And so he had to apply for a credit card before he could hire a car. And here it's very much, cash is a very different, has a very different attitude here. People trust it a lot more, they use it a lot more, they buy things in general when they can afford them, rather than buying them on debt or on credit. And so you find cash is used an awful lot, and the notes here are quite big. I'd only been at the bookshop about a week, and a customer came up and bought one book for about 30 francs, so about $30, and she gave me this purple piece of paper, which had 3 zeros on it. And I'd never seen a 1,000-franc note. That's a $1,000 note, a £600 note. And she gave me this note, and I looked at it and looked at her, and she looked at me and looked at the note, and for her it was normal, and she just wanted her 970 francs change. And for me it was very abnormal, because in England our biggest note is a £50 note, which is about 80 francs. And a £50 note you almost never see, unless you're a drug dealer or a bank robber. And certainly in shops you don't see them that often. £20 notes are the norm. And I remember when I was in New York, 2 years ago now, at a corner store, the guy would not accept a $20 note for 2 bottles of Coke. He said small change only. And yet here, the money machine will give you a 200-franc note, and it's normal. And it's a sure sign that you're a tourist or you haven't lived here very long. It's when you're in the supermarket and you hand over your 200-franc note and you say, I'm awfully sorry, it's all I've got. And of course for the Swiss cashier, it's very strange to be apologising for paying in cash. Whereas for me, it's very strange not to apologise for having this giant note, which in England would cause problems with the change, but here is no problem at all. And it's partly because a lot of commercial activity here is based on trust. So for instance, when we ordered a new fridge, we went to the shop, we ordered the fridge, we gave our address, and 2 days later they delivered it. That was it. No credit card number, no deposit, no bank details, nothing. They delivered this fridge, and when they did, I said, well, do I need to sign something, pay something? He said, oh no, the bill will come in the post. And the bill came in the post, and we had a month to pay it. And it's really quite amazing that in England, I worked in a bookshop, and even for the smallest book, to send it to someone, we would need a credit card number and payment in advance. Whereas here in the bookshop, we would send out thousands of francs of books just with a bill, because on the whole, you know that people only buy things when they can afford them, and so therefore can pay the bill straight away. So it's a very different relationship to money, which in some ways is quite refreshing, in some ways is quite abnormal. I find myself now, and I walk around town, I have 100 francs in my pocket, fairly normal, whereas in England I would never walk around with probably more than £20 in my pocket, because I would have no need really for using it, because I could use plastic for everything. N is for names, and that's not me. That's Basel Carnival, the largest carnival in Switzerland, and the oldest Protestant carnival in the world. And they wear lots of interesting masks like this and throw lots of confetti everywhere. Names are very important here, partly because you have to introduce yourself a lot. But there are various cultural forms of etiquette involved with names, and that's partly because all the Swiss national languages have different forms of you. In English, very sensibly, a few hundred years ago, we just decided on one. So we say you whether you're talking about the Queen or whether you're talking about your 8-year-old niece. Whereas in Swiss languages, there's a formal and an informal, and a plural, and an informal plural, and formal plural. So you have to learn more than one form, and then you have to know when to use it. And with the pronoun comes also which name you use. Do you use first name? Are you informal? Or do you use last name? Are you formal? So you could live, and I have many examples from readers of the book who have emailed me, in the same building as someone for 4 or 5 years and never get past the formal form of you and using last names. Because again, informal will be inside the coconut shell, formal is outside. And so by moving to first names, and du in German or tu in French, implies that you are inside the shell, that you are part of the inner circle. And so that's a step that for a lot of Swiss people is an important step. And when you get to that stage in a friendship, very often you'll go out and you have a drink and you'll toast each other because you are now at Duzis, they say in German. You're now at the informal stage of communicating with each other. The problem is, when you're learning the language, it's very hard to remember as a poor English speaker with just one form of you. In German, for instance, the easiest form is the very formal form because it's the infinitive of the verb with the word Sie to mean you. So for a long time, I was very formal with everyone because it was easy. And my mother-in-law would say, it's fine, look, we're family, we're on first name terms, you don't have to use Sie. And I would say, yeah, but I don't know anything else. You have to come back in 2 years' time and then we can be informal. And now the opposite problem applies in that with all my friends and family, I use the informal du form, and then I forget. It's not that I don't know the words, I just forget that with older ladies, for instance, or with people I don't know, or people who are introduced to me with their last names, that's a sign that I have to use the formal form. And so I stand up on the tram and give up my seat for an old lady who has walked on and use the wrong form of you. And not only does she not take the seat, but that she then castigates me for being very rude and dresses me down for using the wrong you. And so it is a little bit of a minefield for English speakers. The last point about names is that when your baby is born here, you have 3 days to name the baby. Usually you have to name the baby before it leaves hospital. You can't do what friends of mine in England did, take the baby home, see how it looks after a week or so and think, actually, you're a Sarah, I'll call you Sarah. In Switzerland, the name has to be registered. There isn't a formal register of names, but the name does have to be approved by the community registrar to protect the child. So for instance, you can't use place names as a first name, so no Paris Hilton. You can't use bad names, so you could never call your son Judas, for instance, or Cain. You can't use names that would harm the child's emotional well-being. So if your surname happened to be Christmas, you couldn't call your daughter Mary, because she would come in for teasing in the playground. And you can't make up a name just because you think it sounds nice, because again, the child would be teased. So you can't have what happened in New Zealand when a little girl was called Tula Does the Hula from Hawaii, all hyphenated, because obviously it's not a name and so it wouldn't be allowed. And so it feels, for some people, feels very restrictive, very controlling. How dare you say what I can call my child? But it's actually for the benefit of the child, so that they don't get teased, so they don't go through life being called Aryan Nation or something like that, like the boy in America was. What it does mean is that you get a lot of Swiss people with very similar names. So you get a lot of Doris Müllers. And it can be quite confusing to remember which Doris Müller you're talking about. But there is method in the madness. It does have a good reason at its heart. E is for the holy cheese, Emmentaler. Possibly the most famous Swiss export. The cheese with the holes. I think you guys in America just call it Swiss cheese.
Yes.
Don't really differentiate between all the different sorts of Swiss cheese, it's just Swiss cheese. When in fact there's only really one which has holes like that. It's actually the holes are formed by bacteria, expelling air. It's the polite way of saying it. The interesting thing about Emmentaler is it's a Swiss product, a Swiss export, which is known all around the world. And there are many Swiss products, many Swiss exports, many Swiss inventions, which are not known for being Swiss. Because in general, Swiss companies, Swiss people are quite modest. You don't boast about yourself, it's quite hard to promote yourself. So there are lots of Swiss inventions, which I'm sure you'll recognize all of them, but you probably won't know they're Swiss. So Velcro, electric toothbrushes, the toilet duck, absinthe, LSD, really useful everyday things. All Swiss, cellophane, tin foil, all invented here, but really not famous for being Swiss. And that's because their inventors thought, well, I've invented it, that's great, I've given something to the world, and they don't make a big deal about it. And it's a very Swiss trait to be very modest, to not oversell yourself. Tall poppies don't last very long here, they get cut down to size quite quickly. And you see that in the workplace quite often. I was a manager of 4 staff, and sometimes it was actually quite hard in appraisals to get them to say positive things about themselves, to say, I'm good at this is what I'm best at, because that is boasting about yourself, that is pushing yourself forward. And I think part of the reason is Switzerland from the beginning has been a community enterprise, and I'll talk about this in the second half about politics. But basically everyone is equal. There's never been an emperor or a monarch or a president or a general who's in charge. It's always been a community enterprise. So if someone is making themselves look more important than everyone else, they think they are better than the rest of the community. And it's not really the done thing here to brag about yourself. And what's interesting, going back to introductions, when Gregor, my boyfriend, and I went to my sister's wedding in England, he did what he would do in a Swiss wedding. He went round and introduced himself to everyone. And of course they thought, what's this strange man doing? But also, afterwards, some of them said, it was really weird. It was like he felt he was the most important person in the room and everyone had to know who he was. Whereas in fact, it was exactly the opposite. But because of the cultural differences, it came across in completely the wrong way. So it's always interesting to be a fish out of water and to do the wrong thing, but for the right reasons. Penultimate S is for Sundays. They were abolished in America and Britain about 20 years ago. Now you can pretty much do whatever you want on a Sunday. You can go shopping, you can do some DIY. Sunday is almost like any other day. In Switzerland, Sundays still exist. They're not religious in the formal sense, because Switzerland isn't that religious anymore. The last war of religion was in 1847, and it lasted a month and 74 people died, so it was a very civil war. There are Catholic cantons. Cantons are like the states, but the size of counties. And there are Protestant cantons. And the only difference really you see these days is in public holidays. So Catholic cantons tend to have more public holidays because they celebrate lots of things in the Bible, whereas Protestants are just happy to work. So here in Bern we only have 8 public holidays. In the Italian-speaking Ticino they have 15. So I know where I'd rather live. But Sundays here are a day of rest. The shops are closed, in general. In the stations and the airports they're open. You can't do anything which would disturb the community. So no mowing the grass, no DIY, no washing your car. In some blocks of flats, typically Swiss flats do not have their own washing machine. They have a cellar with a laundry room, and you share it with all the flats. And in some, it is locked on a Sunday because you should not be washing on a Sunday because the noise of the machines will disturb the people living in the ground floor flat. And so there are lots of rules about Sundays. You can't even save the planet. Recycling on Sundays is forbidden. So recycling here is a big deal. Swiss recycle almost everything, partly because you pay per bag of rubbish. So of course it's in your own interest to recycle as much as possible. But if you take your bottles to the bottle bank on a Sunday, you very quickly get told off by a little lady living nearby. At least I did. And you learn that after 8 o'clock on any other day, and never on a Sunday, no recycling. And that's because Sunday is a day of relaxation, a day of quiet. And typically, if you're Swiss, what you will do is you'll go to the cinema, you'll go to a museum, because they're closed on Mondays, because they can't possibly open all week round. You'll visit friends, but if you visit friends, of course, you've let them know in advance that you'll be coming. Or you go for a walk, such as here, just near the Eiger, the north face of the Eiger. It's one of my favourite walks. But a Swiss walk is not an English walk. I discovered that very quickly. An English walk is a nice stroll through a meadow, maybe a little hill, a couple of hours, end up at the pub, sit down, have a drink. That's Sunday walk in England. A Sunday walk in Switzerland is height differences of 500 meters, no asphalt, lots of rocks, you have to wear boots and have sticks, and you're a panting wreck by the time you get to the end, and there's definitely no pub anywhere in sight. So I have learned. I let my Swiss friends get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, which they do. On a nice sunny Sunday in the summer, the trains are busier on a Sunday at 7 o'clock than they are during the rush hour in the week, because everyone is heading to the mountains to go for a walk. I let them get up, deal with the crowds, deal with the walk. I have a leisurely breakfast. I catch a little mountain train and meet them at the top. And it's much more relaxing. That's my Sunday. The last S is for Swinglish, the Swiss version of English. And it comes in many forms. A lot of Swiss people speak wonderful English. A lot of Swiss people think they speak wonderful English. And as an English speaker, you are expected to understand the English that they are speaking, because you are the native speaker. So, for instance, car in this picture. A friend of mine parked her car in the space marked car. She didn't notice it was a very large space, so she parked at right angles, thinking that everyone had to do that. And then a couple of hours later she came back and of course she had a parking ticket. Yes. Because car does not mean car. Car means coach in French.